I was halfway through shoveling the last patch of snow from my private road when I saw her Janessa Grigsby coming down the hill in her ridiculous neon pink parka and clipboard in hand, like she was on some self-appointed federal mission. I groaned loud enough for the birds to scatter. Let me explain something first. I'm Dalton Zeke. I built this road, literally. Laid the gravel, poured the concrete, and paid for every inch out of my own pocket when the county wouldn't touch it. It connects my house and a couple of others to the main road. No HOA funds went into it. None. Still, I maintain it, plow it, and salt it each winter on my dime. So imagine my reaction when Janessa shoved a paper in my face. "Dalton, this is your notice," she said, tapping her manicured nail on the top line. "You owe the HOA $875 for snow removal." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "For snow removal," she repeated slowly, like I was a toddler who couldn't read. "You used HOA resources. That road might be on your property, but the rest of us use it too, and the HOA board agreed it counts as shared access." I looked down at my shovel, then at the snow piled neatly along the edge of the road. "Janessa, I've been the only person clearing this road for the past 6 winters. With this shovel, right here, no plows, no HOA," she sniffed. "Well, we had to send someone to inspect it after the last storm. That cost money." "Oh, did you now?" I asked. "Who did you send?" "Our treasurer, Melvin. He walked the road to verify it was safe." I nearly laughed. "So you're charging me $800 because Melvin took a stroll?" "That's not all," she said, flipping her clipboard. "We also need to factor in administrative processing, board meeting time, and neighborhood-wide benefits. Everyone uses that road." I crossed my arms. "Then maybe the HOA should have helped pay for it when I built it," she smiled tightly. "The board wasn't formed yet, but now that we exist, shared-use roads fall under our jurisdiction." I stepped closer, still holding the snow shovel. "You mean the HOA you and your book club cooked up last year without a vote?" Her smile vanished. "It was legally filed, sure, after you slipped the notice into people's mailboxes the day before Thanksgiving." Janessa straightened up. "Dalton, if you don't pay the snow removal fee within 14 days, we'll assess additional penalties. It's all in the bylaws." I snatched the paper out of her hand, scanning it. Her so-called bylaw referenced community-maintained access roads, but my road wasn't one of them. I never signed over an easement. There was no record of the HOA assuming responsibility. And I had receipts, permits, contractor invoices, and even photos of me paving the damn thing in my work boots. I looked her dead in the eye. "You messed with the wrong guy," her voice faltered for the first time. "Excuse me, I built this road, I maintain this road. And now I'm going to bury this HOA nonsense under more paperwork than you could ever imagine." I walked back to my truck, pulled out the file folder I kept for situations just like this, and flipped it open. Janessa's face lost color when she saw the stack of county permits with my name all over them. "You've got 2 weeks, I said. "Fine, I'll see you in 1. I turned and walked back up my road, leaving her standing there in the snow, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The next morning, I drove down to the county records office. Not because I needed more proof, I already had every permit and invoice neatly filed, but because I wanted to make sure nothing had changed behind my back. With people like Janessa and her little board of busybodies, you learn to expect the unexpected. "Zeke," said Dave, the clerk behind the counter. He was halfway through a powdered donut and had a newspaper tucked under his elbow. "Haven't seen you since that zoning meeting about the fence heights." "Yeah, well," I said, setting the HOA notice on the counter, "looks like I've got a fresh headache." He took one glance and snorted. "Oh boy, Grigsby again. She's trying to say the HOA has jurisdiction over my road now. Claims it's shared access." Dave wiped his fingers on a napkin and pulled up the parcel maps. "Still listed as private, deeded to you, no public easement, no right-of-way granted to any association. Any recent filings?" He clicked through a few screens, adjusted his glasses, and shook his head. Nothing touching your land. No amendments, no transfer of access. If they're claiming authority, it isn't through us. I leaned on the counter. Could they have tried to file something elsewhere, like under a different name? Dave raised an eyebrow. Not legally. Any change to property access would have to come through this office, and you'd have to sign off. I tapped the edge of the clipboard Janessa had left behind. Then they're bluffing, or worse, he frowned. Want me to print you certified copies of the road parcel records? Signatures, timestamp, all that? Better make 2 sets. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Carla the nurse who lived 3 houses down. She sounded rattled. Dalton, did you give the HOA permission to put up a gate at the top of the hill? What gate? They're out there now, installing metal posts. Janessa told me they're securing the road for liability reasons. I nearly dropped my phone. Are you serious? They're blocking access. She said residents will be issued keycards once it's done. I hung up and made a hard U-turn. By the time I crested the hill, I saw a white truck with a local fencing company logo. 2 guys were unloading sections of metal fencing and digging post holes right where my road met the public street. Janessa stood nearby, arms crossed, supervising like she was running a military operation. I parked and marched straight to the foreman. Who hired you? He pulled a clipboard from under his arm. Work order from the Lakeside Crest HOA says they've got authority over this access point. You see that sign? I pointed to the corner of my lot where a weathered wooden stake still stood. That's the marker for my property line. This road is not HOA territory. You're trespassing. He looked between me and Janessa. Ma'am, is this true? She didn't waver. We consulted our attorney. The board voted to protect community infrastructure. The gate is staying. Then your attorney's about to get very busy, I said. Because you're blocking access to land you don't own. I walked over to her, pulled out my phone, and took photos of the construction work, the placement of the fence posts, and the HOA president herself standing right in the middle of it. Then I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Harlan showed up 20 minutes later. He was a stocky guy with a no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for not liking HOA drama. He listened to both sides, flipping through the copy of parcel records I handed him. Janessa, he said, you don't have any legal authority over this road. It's private property. You can't install a gate on land you don't control. She folded her arms tighter. We're acting in the interest of the neighborhood. You're acting without a permit, he said, and on someone else's land. That's criminal trespass. She opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off. Shut the project down, now. The foreman didn't need to be told twice. He started packing up the equipment while one of his workers yanked the half-set posts out of the ground. Janessa tried to save face. We'll be filing a formal complaint. You do that, Harlan said, but if you or anyone from the HOA sets foot on this property again without written permission, I'll be filing charges. He handed me a copy of the incident report. If they try anything else, call me directly. After everyone cleared out, I stood at the top of the hill and watched the tire tracks fade into the slush. The silence was good. It gave me time to think. By the next day, word had spread. Carla brought over a tray of lemon bars as a peace offering. She wasn't part of the board, never had been, but she'd been pressured into paying dues and hadn't known what else to do. Her story wasn't unique. Over the next 48 hours, 7 other homeowners came by to talk. All of them had been fed nonsense about mandatory participation, retroactive maintenance fees, and communal obligations. None of them had ever signed anything. I set up a meeting in my garage, nothing fancy. Just folding chairs, a coffee urn, and copies of the original property deeds. I explained the difference between a voluntary association and a mandatory one. Showed them how no covenants had ever been filed with the county. How the so-called bylaws were just PDFs printed off Janessa's home computer. So we're not actually in the HOA? Asked Gary, the retired mechanic from halfway down the block. Not unless you sign something, I said. He looked around at the others. I didn't. Neither had anyone else. That night, I drafted a cease and desist letter citing the state's civil code for fraudulent misrepresentation. I attached the sheriff's report, the parcel documentation, and a notarized statement from the fencing company confirming the HOA had ordered work on land they didn't own. Then I hand-delivered it to Janus's mailbox, making sure my security camera caught every moment. The following morning, she called an emergency board meeting. But by then, the wheels were already in motion. Gary had contacted the state attorney general's office. Carla had filed a complaint with the Department of Consumer Affairs. And I had retained a property rights attorney named Marlene Cruz, who'd made a name for herself dismantling fake HOAs across the state. She arrived at my place the next day with a briefcase and a wicked gleam in her eye. "I love cases like this," she said. "No legal standing, false claims, attempted land seizure, it's textbook fraud. You think we've got a case?" "Oh, I don't think," she said. "I know. And once we file for declaratory relief and punitive damages, they'll wish they'd never printed that clipboard. We weren't just going to make them back off. We were going to make it impossible for them to ever pull this stunt again." 3 days after Marlene Cruz took the case, the first official letter landed on Janus's doorstep. It was a cease and desist, wrapped in a legal warning that used phrases like fraudulent encroachment, unauthorized jurisdiction, and civil restitution for attempted land annexation. Certified, of course. Marlene didn't play games. By the following Monday, the HOA's board had gone silent. Their group emails ceased. No more flyers, no more threats stuffed into mailboxes. But the silence wasn't surrender, it was the eye of the storm. On Friday morning, Carla knocked on my door, clutching a paper with both hands and eyes wide. "They're doubling down," she said, stepping into my garage. "Look." I took the paper and read. It was a new assessment notice, this time for a Community Legal Defense Fund fee. Apparently, the HOA was demanding over $400 from each homeowner to protect the board from baseless legal threats and preserve neighborhood integrity. Carla's voice cracked. "They're saying you've endangered the entire community by involving a lawyer." I handed it back. "They're bluffing. They can't enforce fees on a board that doesn't legally exist," she nodded slowly. "But Dalton, some people are paying. They're scared." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my road anymore. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, they were manipulating people into handing over money under threat of fake legal consequences. That was extortion, and we had to put an end to it. Marlene and I met that afternoon at the county courthouse. She filed a petition for injunctive relief, requesting a temporary halt to all HOA activity pending investigation. But she didn't stop there. She also contacted the district attorney's office. By Wednesday, the DA's office had opened a preliminary inquiry into the HOA's financial practices. And then we got our break. One of the former HOA board members, a man named Roy Benton, reached out through Gary. He'd quietly stepped down 2 months after the board was formed, right after realizing Janusa had never properly registered the association's financials with the state. He met us in the back booth of a diner just off the highway, nervously fidgeting with a spoon. "I didn't know it was illegal," he said, keeping his voice low. "She told us she'd handle the paperwork, said it was all standard stuff, but then she started depositing dues into a private account. When I asked about it, she told me to stop asking questions." Marlene leaned forward. "Do you have anything in writing?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone and tapped through his photos. He showed us a screenshot of a text message exchange with Janusa, where she explicitly mentioned moving funds to my personal account temporarily to avoid tax issues. Marlene set her coffee down. "That's embezzlement." Roy swallowed hard. "I just want to do the right thing." "You just did," I said. That night, the DA's office escalated the case to a formal investigation. A week later, 2 unmarked cars rolled into the neighborhood just after dawn. I watched from my driveway as investigators entered Janusa's home with a warrant. They came out 20 minutes later with 2 laptops, 3 boxes of documents, and a very pale Janessa in handcuffs. The charges were serious: wire fraud, embezzlement, and criminal misrepresentation. Turned out she'd collected over $30,000 from homeowners under false pretenses and funneled most of it into personal expenses. Vacations, spa treatments, even a down payment on a second car. The fallout was immediate. The HOA effectively collapsed overnight. Melvin, the so-called treasurer, vanished from the neighborhood, his house going dark and his mailbox overflowing. No one had seen him since. The fencing company sent me an apology letter and a full refund for the partial installation, admitting they'd been misled about property ownership. But the real victory came 2 weeks later in a packed courtroom downtown. Marlene stood beside me as the judge reviewed the evidence. Parcel maps, financial records, Roy's testimony, everything laid out in meticulous order. The judge's ruling was swift and unambiguous. The HOA had no legal authority, had violated multiple state and county laws, and had unlawfully attempted to assert control over private property. He ordered restitution for all homeowners who'd paid into the fake association, plus damages for emotional distress and legal fees, an amount totaling over $60,000. And then came the final blow. He granted a permanent injunction barring any future HOA from forming in our neighborhood without unanimous consent from every property owner, and full compliance with state registration procedures. In other words, Janessa's little empire wasn't just dismantled, it was legally salted. After the hearing, a few of us grabbed lunch at the diner where we'd first met Roy. Gary raised a glass of iced tea. To Dalton, the guy who paved the road and paved the way. I shook my head. I just didn't let them steal it, Carla laughed. Still. Next time someone tries to charge you for shoveling your own driveway, I want front row seats. Roy, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, leaned back. They thought they had us trapped, but they never saw it coming, and that was the truth. They thought they could use fear, paperwork, and fake authority to steamroll a quiet neighborhood. But they forgot one thing: some of us read the fine print, and some of us never stop documenting everything. The neighborhood didn't just go back to normal, it got better. People started talking again. Helping each other. We set up a real, informal neighborhood group, not a board, just a place to share tools, swap tips, and make sure nobody ever tried to pull something like this again. The road stayed just like it was clean, clear, and mine. But now, everyone knew where the lines were drawn. And thanks to a few files, a few brave neighbors, and one bulldog of a lawyer, those lines weren't going anywhere. The neighborhood was still buzzing from the court ruling when I got a letter, one not from an imaginary board or a fake treasurer, but from the actual county prosecutor's office. It was addressed to me personally, sealed and stamped. I opened it right there in the driveway, careful not to tear any part of it. Inside were 2 things: an acknowledgement of my cooperation with the investigation and a subpoena request for a follow-up hearing. Not civil, criminal. Marlene called me 2 hours later, already knowing. They're going forward with felony charges, she said. The DA is going to pursue full prosecution. Apparently they found something worse than misused HOA funds. I set the phone on speaker and leaned over my workbench. What did they dig up? Forgery, and a fake land transfer filed under the name of a dead notary. I didn't say anything. They found it when the DA's office reviewed all the documents Janessa submitted to justify the gate installation, she continued. One of them included a forged easement agreement with your name on it dated 6 years ago. But the notary who supposedly signed off died 4 years before that. I stared at the faded blueprint roll I'd kept from the road construction. She filed it with the county clerk's office, Marlene added, but it never made it into the official records because the signature was flagged by an intern during a random audit last month. That intern deserves a medal. I let out a low breath. Can they prove she did it? She used her personal email address to submit the scan. That was the tipping point. The DA moved to add felony forgery, attempted fraudulent property transfer, and obstruction of public records to the existing charges. Janice's arrest had been dramatic, but her arraignment was quiet. She didn't speak. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea, but it didn't matter. The state had her dead to rights. It wasn't long before the fallout reached the rest of the so-called board. A forensic accountant, assigned by the court, traced the flow of funds through a chain of small transactions. Turns out, Melvin hadn't vanished. He'd taken a trip to Arizona, trying to liquidate a vacation property he bought with HOA funds. The sheriff's office coordinated with local authorities and picked him up 2 days later. He was brought back in cuffs. At the preliminary hearing, a parade of witnesses testified. Carla described the pressure she faced, how board members dropped by unannounced and hinted at liens they had no authority to place. Roy explained the internal dynamics of the board, how Janice operated like a CEO, bypassing votes, rewriting policies on her laptop, and threatening to revise membership tiers if people didn't comply. I was called up last. The prosecutor handed me a printout of the forged easement. "Mr. Zeke, have you ever seen this document before the investigation began?" "No." "Is that your signature?" "Absolutely not." "Did you ever at any time sign over access to your road to the Lakeside Crest HOA?" "Never." The judge asked to see my original parcel records. I pulled them from the folder I'd carried in since day one. "Verified and notarized in accordance with county procedures," the prosecutor said, holding them up. "All consistent and no indication of any transfer." The judge nodded, then turned to Janice's lawyer. "Counsel, unless you're prepared to dispute the authenticity of the state's evidence, I'm inclined to proceed to trial." They weren't prepared. The lawyer asked for a recess. 3 days later, Janice accepted a plea deal. 5 felony counts, including forgery and fraud. She agreed to full restitution and forfeiture of all assets tied to HOA funds. Melvin took a separate deal: 2 years of probation, plus community service and repayment. The court ordered the dismantling of the HOA entity. Every trace of its existence was to be deleted from county records. A receivership was created to manage the repayment process, and I was appointed as the liaison between residents and the court-appointed administrator. It wasn't a title I wanted, but I took it to make sure no one ever tried anything like this again. 2 months later, the neighborhood held its first real meeting, voluntary, informal, and entirely transparent. No dues, no votes, no threats, just chairs in Carla's backyard and a stack of burgers on Gary's grill. Roy brought lemonade. Someone asked what we should call ourselves now. "Not an HOA," someone shouted, and that stuck. We printed up a few signs: "Not an HOA, just neighbors." One of the kids down the street, a sharp teenager named Lily, offered to build a simple website to keep everyone informed: yard sales, lost pets, weather alerts. She even added a digital archive of the original court filings, just in case anyone ever questioned what had happened. Carla approached me during cleanup. "You think anyone else is going to try something like that again?" I shook my head. "Not while I'm still here," she smiled. "You really hate clipboards, don't you?" "Only when they show up in the snow," we both laughed. That winter, when the first big storm hit, I was out early with the plow attachment on my truck, but this time I wasn't alone. Gary showed up with a snowblower. Carla brought coffee in a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. Even Lily came out, dragging her younger brother behind her with a shovel. The road was cleared in under an hour. No fees, no threats, no fake bylaws, just neighbors doing what needed doing. And for the first time in a long while, the road didn't just belong to me. It belonged to everyone who stood up when it counted.